I think what we think is most interesting and relevant for us is really looking into the future is probably electrification, and on the one side, and on the other side, autonomous driving.
Welcome to Sobremesa podcast, a show featuring interviews with up-and-coming tech founders. You'll hear their stories, key learnings, and the challenges they face as they scale their startups. You'll also get a glimpse into the latest trends and news from true insiders in their industries. Your host, Matthias at FJ Labs, will run the show in the authentic Sobremesa style. That special time spent after a good meal, hanging with friends, and having interesting conversations. So grab your coffee and enjoy the show.
Welcome everybody to Sobremesa podcast. I'm your host Matthias, and today we have with us Nikolaus from Kyte, co-founder of Kyte. Kyte is an online car rental platform which offers door-to-door services. What does it mean? You want to order a car, you want to rent a car, but you don't want to go through the hassle of going through the paperwork, going to the locations. And so you just press a button on your phone, just like ordering an Uber, and the car will literally get delivered to your door. You can use it for as long as you want, and whenever you're done, Kyte will pick the car for you. It's truly a magical experience. I tried it here in New York, and it felt like I was cheating or something. So really good stuff, Nick. Great to have you here. Lots of things to talk about. Lots of things going on in tech right now. But before that, congrats on the Series B, $60 million. So how does it feel?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me here. Great to be here. This year was definitely not a walk in the park with respect to equity financing and going through a Series B fundraise. But we made it happen, and specifically the team really pushed through it this year, and it definitely feels relieving and feels great to have it locked in and have a business that is capitalized very well now, and really just. Again, focus back on building the business and focus on execution and taking it from here, and now kind of obviously make that capital last as long as possible and grow the business with it.
Totally. There's still a long way to go, but it's a huge milestone. When you think about kind of taking a step back and you think about being part of something like this, and when I mean something like this, I mean a fast-growing startup. Like, is this something you always dreamed of doing back in the day, or did it sort of happen?
Yeah, I would say honestly a combination of both. I would say back in Germany, during kind of my undergrad studies, I did a few internships in I would say high growth companies, startups, and I do have to say I really kind of got the first taste of what it feels to really just execute at incredible high speeds, really the hustle mentality back in the day, really build something from scratch. I do think that was kind of these were some initial trigger points, and I think there was something magical around the idea of going into the US, going to Stanford, being in Silicon Valley, kind of being in the heart of tech, obviously, and I do think that was kind of a core driving force back in the day. But I think on the other side, when I left Uber, I think I was aware that it was kind of a high risk bet and experiment, right? In terms of, am I the right founder to really kind of go after something like that? I don't think you can really fully know it before you do it, and you kind of have to just figure it out on the fly. Now looking backwards, obviously, it's almost hard to imagine to do anything else than starting a company. And so that's
Nick,
interesting.
And there's something interesting that you mentioned about the persistence and being resilient. You had a pivot before getting to the actual form of Kyte. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Exactly.
Because one of the things that I'm interested in is talking about iterations and pivoting in the early life of startups. And maybe walk us through that feeling when maybe what was the predecessor of Kyte was, and why did you pull out the plug, and maybe talk about, for entrepreneurs out there who are kind of iterating and pivoting, when is persistence not the answer? Because the common answer is you had to keep pushing, just, don't listen to the naysayers, and kind of that is very rewarding at some points, but sometimes you do need to pull out the plug, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a $1 million question. I think it's a very fine line between that level of persistence that is acquired and just kind of, I guess, like ignorance or kind of not being intellectual honest, right? Yeah. So, I mean, back to your original question. I mean, I left Uber at the end of 2018. My other co-founder left his job in automotive. My other co-founder was just finishing up his MBA, and we just started hacking around on a couple of different ideas in the transportation space. And one that we spent a couple of months on was essentially some sort of loyalty program for ground transportation. I think looking backwards, it was not the most terrible idea, but I think it was relatively bad. I think looking backwards, I think the problem ultimately that we realized with that idea was that it was just I would say you can probably build a business in that space or kind of around that idea, but it's just not going to be really big, and it's not going to be really exciting and interesting enough. And I think that was kind of the core problem that we realized at some point. And I think we just had these moments where we realized, okay, if we're really going to work for this for the next, I don't know, 5, 8, 10, 15 years, it just has to be really big, right? Like if it works, and it can be high risk, but if it works, if it started to work, it just has to become really, really big, and exciting. And I think we learned a lot of things about kind of our intrinsic internal ambition level, what we want to optimize for, what is really important for us in kind of building a company. So I think just really forcing yourself to be super intellectually honest with yourself, with your idea, with the traction, with product market fit. And I think the other piece is just trying to really dig into your own, I think, conviction level, right? And I think in all honesty, I think with our first idea, with this loyalty program for transportation, I think we got to a point where I don't think we fully believed in that business to become really large anymore, right? And I think then that's the ultimate problem. And I think with Kyte, I think we just got to that point so quickly where we knew that this can become really big, and I think we had incredible high level of conviction on it. I think there was obviously 90% of other people didn't have the conviction to it and didn't believe in it, but that's fine, right? As long as you have your own conviction level, you're intellectually honest with yourself. I think that's a good situation to be in. Then it's worth fighting for that. But if you obviously don't have that conviction level, then I think it's already
at the end of the day, is being true to what you really want. I mean, obviously, if there's indications that the business is not going to work, then that's a different problem. But if from the get-go you're not as excited, then time to focus on something else. I want to go back to your Uber days, because you've mentioned this a couple of times. You were working at Uber from 2016 to 2018, which is a very interesting period, right? Because you worked under Travis Kalanick, the initial CEO and co-founders, and then with his successor, Jara. So maybe talk about your days before 2017 when Travis left, which some people think of them as kind of the golden days of Uber. Lots of amazing talent, especially on the engineering side. Like what is it that you value the most from those days? What do you think you learned from Travis or from those days? And maybe what are some things that you didn't like as much from those days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think all in all, I mean, it was an amazing ride with Travis back in the day. So I mean, I think you really learned what it means to operate at a very high level of excellence, I think, and kind of where the bar is in terms of talent, in terms of speed, in terms of ambition level, right? Like it's just, I think it's very good to and I think very healthy to kind of like learn these bars in all these different dimensions, and kind of having seen that at Uber back in the days. And again, I think the ambition level to really go out for to build that type of global company, really pushing on all these different dimensions, going extremely fast, solving really, really complex and interesting problems. I think Uber was just really, really good at that. And I think the other piece related to it is probably that level of kind of fighting attitude, right? I mean, obviously, Uber to some degree, I think was obviously kind of crossing the line in some ways, and in terms of like collaborating with regulators, collaborating with cities around the world, but this general thing of like, hey, like you're really trying to change some existing status. You're trying to disprove a lot of other people or companies out there. I do think that is that kind of like fighting war mentality. I think it's something that in general has some kind of like healthy benefits to it, specifically in the early days. I do think the one thing, and I think when we talk about kind of our values and principles at Kyte, I think we're always pretty explicit around that of the things that for example, like we appreciated from Uber days, but the other things that we actually didn't really appreciate and kind of don't really want to be associated with that. I think a certain level of humbleness was missing, I think, right? And I think there is just I wouldn't say necessarily arrogance, but just this. I think you can kind of push ambition level and fighting attitude and speed. I think you can kind of like put that to maybe into a little bit too far in some ways. And I think what is just very important, I think in kind of building a company, especially as first time founders. For us, but also I think back in the days of Uber doing something new, like I think a certain level of humbleness, learning attitude, actually not trying to completely just execute your own way on something, but also learning from from mistakes that other companies, people did in the space. I think that is just like very important. And I mean, I think one, to be very specific, I mean, the specific, I think one problem that Travis and Uber had was some level of, I think, I would call it maybe paranoia, and like that associated with some level of really building everything yourself and just going after self-driving, going after a bike sharing, going after scooters, going after like really investing heavily into own data centers and maps. Maps is probably like one of the prime examples.
Lack of focus as well, right?
It's lack of focus. It's obviously, I mean, it's very expensive to fight all these wars to really kind of build everything yourself, and it's just it's a little bit of a level of, I think I think it's a signal of not really being humble and kind of true to your core kind of your core strength, actually, right?
Which is so hard because some could argue that some of the things that attracted people, that some of that magnet for talent, which is the ambition and that kind of fighting and winning mentality, was another side of the same coin, which also led Travis and Uber being a bit paranoid or being a bit arrogant as well. So like, it's good that you guys had that experience, so you can hopefully try to replicate the good things and try to avoid the other things. But it's such a challenging balancing act that you have to perform.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then maybe one last point, right? I think the other thing, which obviously I think was at some point then very obvious, I do think the kind of high growth at Uber led to obviously problems and points of immaturity, of structures not really being built out that are appropriate for the right level of company scale, right? In terms of leadership, in terms of diversity and inclusion, around different topics of really the people side of the business, where I think it was just I think the company or the structures were a little bit kind of like lacking behind what the company needed at that level of kind of scale out there. And I think, I mean, ultimately, I think Travis was willing to really change and adopt to these things. Ultimately, I think it was too late, and the board didn't really give him that level of confidence anymore. But I think that was obviously the other component that led to definitely certain problems back in the day. Yeah.
Nick, I want to zoom into Kyte's operations, because at the beginning I described this sort of magical experience that I had here, and when I tell my friends or people I know about Kyte, and the ones that do not know about you, they're like, how do they do this? And they're kind of skeptical, because like, how could they do that? Can you maybe walk us in a very simple way, step by step, what happens under the hood when I press a button and just order a car? Like what that button triggers a signal, and what happens afterwards?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So you as the consumer, you book a Kyte via the app or via the website. You basically specify your delivery location where you want your car to be delivered. You specify the time. And then we receive that booking. We internally in our system, we make that reservation for that car. And essentially our operational setup, the way it looks is really that we have what we call kind of like dark parking hubs around cities in the US, depending on the city size, one or multiple of these dark parking hubs. It's very, very cheap real estate, right? Really think about kind of the cloud kitchen malls of the world, probably. Very cheap real estate, kind of tucked away in kind of subprime locations, right? So we don't have to pay for any sort of high expensive tourist prime real estate, expensive locations out there. And that's where we store our fleet, right? And then, once essentially the booking time approaches, we have that car reserved for that trip. We have a delivery driver, which we call them surfers, Kyte surfers. We have them matched to those trips. The Kyte delivery driver then goes to the lot, picks up that clean, maintained, prepared car, picks up the key, drives that car to the location of your delivery, and hands you over the key, right? And you can obviously follow that trip. You see the ETA in real time. You know the exact location, time when the driver gets there. The driver they hand you over the key. You sign your rental agreement on your phone, and then that's it. And you can take off on your trip, right? And that's really the kind of like the core flow.
And what does this Kyte surfer do afterwards?
Yeah, exactly. So most of them, it's really up to them, but most of them, they have their own electric scooters that they just transport in the trunk of the car.
I saw that. Yeah. That was actually funny. He just delivered the car, opened the trunk, and it's like, okay, taking out a bike, and he biked probably back to the dark store.
Exactly.
Garage.
It's a foldable bike. It's an electric scooter. Some even have their electric skateboards. I mean, it's pretty incredible how efficient you can actually really move around with these modes of transportations in the kind of like urban high density environment.
Are all of these employees, or some of them are contractors?
Yeah, so they're all 1099 contractors, and I think the value proposition for them is obviously an incredible, flexible working schedule, right? You can really completely, as if you're a Kyte delivery driver, you can build your own schedule together. You can only take the trips that really fit into your other schedule. You can do other gig jobs in between. You can have other jobs in between. You can really build your own schedules together. And that is for a lot of them that is very high value, right?
One of the things that stood out to me when talking to you, Nick, was kind of your customer obsession, right? And I believe the NPS, the Net Promoter Score you guys have, is around 85%, 85, right? And just as a reminder, NPS is negative 100 to all the way up to positive 100. And if I'm not mistaken, kind of the incumbents in the car rental space, Avis and Hertz, are hovering around 0 or something like that. How do you achieve such a high NPS? And talk a little bit more about that customer obsession, and what are some of the things that you've thought about doing and maybe that were too costly to do? Like, once you open up the floodgates to improvements, really you can get very, very creative.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the very early days, I think we were just, I think we really that consumer experience of really first principle thinking of, okay, what is that amazing experience? What does it look like if you need a car for a day or a couple of days? I think we just put a lot of energy and efforts in that, in interviewing obviously hundreds of customers, in really going deep, in obviously doing delivery trips ourselves, really talking to customers, talking to our network out there. So I think that was the kind of like early days, and then I think it's really about building the right feedback loops, right? And I think one of the most interesting things and exciting things that are in our business is that most of these feedback loops, we can talk a bit, or we can talk more about that in a bit, but one of the most interesting elements about all these feedback loops is they always cross kind of what we call kind of like bits and atoms, right? So there's always kind of the digital in-app experience, kind of the magic on the really kind of core digital product side of things involved, but there's also really the operational component, right? And I think one of the most interesting things, but also one of the most complex and difficult things, is that in order to really build that amazing consumer experience, you actually really have to always look at this entire loop across product, operations, and engineering, across bits and atoms, right? And again, the atom side, that's obviously the delivery driver coming on time.
Tell us more about your theory about bits and atoms, which I think is very interesting. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's so I think the core theory there for us as a business is, I would say it's almost like a little bit our secret sauce, right? As a company. And I think the way we look at it is that before Kyte, we always think there's kind of two generations of other companies, right? And the generation one is kind of the big rental car companies out there that exist for the last 50 years. The one thing they're actually really good at is like really the asset piece of the business, right? Like they're basically car companies that are also kind of offering some sort of service to the consumer, but they're really, really good at actually like the asset management, right? Like buying cars from the manufacturers, managing these cars over 2 years and then selling them again after, and the kind of and that's what they're good at, but they're really bad in building a magical product experience, really building obviously sophisticated algorithms, really building an amazing digital product experience. And then on the other side, the I would say generation two of companies, right? These are the kind of typical kind of tech marketplaces, right? They're actually good in algorithms, building a digital product experience, really, really good in that. But actually, they don't have any DNA of really hardcore kind of asset operations management out there, right? And I would say, again, these are the typical kind of, and we don't have to talk about names, but the typical kind of the peer-to-peer, the ride-hailing, the transportation marketplaces out there, the kind of classic Silicon Valley tech marketplaces. And we think in order to really—
Are you talking about your competitors?
I mean, I would say, yeah, to some degree. I mean, obviously, some of them, they're going after the same user. Yeah, no, sure. Absolutely. But I would say our core hypothesis that in order to really build the biggest, strongest, most defensible company out there in the broader transportation space, let's call it, for trips that are longer than a ride hail, right? Where you actually need to get a car. In order to really build the strongest company out there, you actually need to be good and across these two dimensions, right? Across the bits, the software component, the digital product experience, and the atoms, which is really the asset and the fleet management. And I think if you really boil it down, you just realize there's actually really not that many companies out there that are really good in both. I think the one example we always for ourselves we put out there is Amazon. Quite frankly, I mean they have 10,000s of obviously Sprinter vans across the country. They own their own warehouses. They're incredible asset capital intensive. But that's the combination of that with the technology side. That's one of their strongest modes, right? And I think if anybody would say now, or most people would agree that if somebody wants to go after Amazon, oh, that's a very hard nut to crack, or like that's a very very big endeavor out there. So really combining these two things, it's I think that's kind of really where a lot of I think it's very hard. But if you get it right, it's incredible valuable, right? And maybe one last point, I think in that setup here, I think that is important to realize is, I think I think Silicon Valley initially, Silicon Valley in general, like they don't give you a lot of credits for, I think, the asset component first, right? Like I would say that's one reason why, I mean, we always see ourselves as kind of a contrarian and unsexy business, right? Because we have that asset component in there, which again, I think is very unusual for Silicon Valley tech. There's actually not a lot of talent in Silicon Valley, which is really good of managing large balance sheets, managing assets on the ground, right? It's just a very different beast. You need a different mindset. You need to be able to really talk to the debt side, to lenders. They want to see very different things. They have very different risk tolerances. Obviously, they want to see that it's much more about downside protection for them. And so, just kind of dealing with that side of the business, I think if you do that well, it's actually very very valuable if you kind of can pull that off.
especially today, right? Like, Silicon Valley has not been a fan of these ops heavy, asset heavy, capital intensive models, but even less so today. So maybe let's take a small detour here. Like maybe for entrepreneurs thinking about starting something in this more asset heavy space, like what could be some advice that you could give them from the get-go when they think about starting something that's perceived as less sexy?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the first step is probably to really be clear of, well, is it the right thing to basically go down a little bit more of an asset heavy route, right? And actually take on that piece of the business. And I think, I think there's a couple of dimensions. I think the classic dimensions that I think we also realized in our journey. When we took that step of taking on a large credit facility and really going down that route much more intensely, one is obviously does the becoming more asset heavy, does it help you with, for example, controlling the full consumer experience, right? If it basically, do you need to be asset heavy to control the full consumer experience? I think for us, a lot of the answer was actually yes at some point, right? Really managing a complex operational flow, which I just described before. Obviously, managing the quality or the cleanliness of the car, the maintenance level, all of these pieces are like there's a certain value if you actually have full control over the asset, and if not some sort of third party basically owner of that asset actually basically makes it difficult for you to control that experience, right? So that's one component. I think the other component would be, do you need to own the assets in order to really control your destiny and scale the business, right? Or, and I think there's one question of, well, is there a large enough, fragmented enough kind of like marketplace out there that you can actually aggregate, right? And I would say if the answer is yes, you can actually you can actually aggregate a highly fragmented marketplace out there. Then maybe the answer is, oh, you actually don't have to go down the asset heavy path. If there's not, that would be another argument to really go down more asset heavy. And I mean, maybe the last element is probably around just like unit economics, right? If like do you get a lot more gains in terms of your economics and your margins by having by taking on the asset component? And I think for us, the answer was also like, yes, absolutely. If the fleet, I think that has a lot of benefits in terms of our gross margins, right? And I think with all of that, maybe just as a meta point, I think that one of the core pieces is probably also to say, okay, if we take on the asset side, let's just then be very, very explicit of our level of commitment, right? And I think at some point we just had to decide of like, okay, now like we actually fully commit. We actually have to bring in people in-house that knows that know the debt capital side of the business, that know really fleets, right? Like then you actually have to invest in that piece. And I think you can't do it, you can't kind of half commit or kind of only do it a little bit. I think at some point if you have a credit facility in place, for example, like you have to actually really do it well, right? And otherwise, I think the danger is just very big that it blows up.
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. Let me try to hit the important points one by one. So just as a clarification question, you guys started effectively as a marketplace, right? And then migrated towards this more vertically integrated approach, right?
That is correct. Exactly.
So this is something I've been meaning to pick your brain on, the kind of marketplace discussion versus vertically integrated approach. And number one is, would you have started kind of vertically integrated from the get-go? Or do you think, this transition, this progressive verticalization was the right way to do it? And when is the right moment to switch? Because we've invested in hundreds of marketplaces and we've seen many different approaches and many different trajectories. And I've seen as they mature, a bunch of marketplaces migrating towards this more, asset heavy approach, which in essence they end up not being a marketplace anymore. Do you think that's sort of the natural trajectory of marketplaces, what it should be? Or would you have started from the get-go as a vertically integrated platform?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I think the the honest answer is probably that I don't think we really had a choice at the beginning. And what I mean by that is that I don't think anybody would have given a bunch of kind of first-time kind of founders with basically maybe like $10,000 in revenue access to significant amounts of like debt capital to essentially purchase fleets from OEMs directly. Right? And I think there's just I think we needed that kind of the first 1-2 years of operations and building really the track record and the volume of the business to actually demonstrate that we can pull that off, and that we kind of can put the right pieces in place to actually, I would say, have at least the kind of base the base level of business maturity in place to actually take on that additional piece, right? And I guess I think it goes back to the point that I think if you want to play around on the debt side of such a business, in terms of like asset-backed financing, for example, right? Like the bar is just it's just a different bar than in just like a pure venture space, right? Again, and that has to do with like the risk appetite of these banks. I mean, they just can't lose money. So I feel like you have to first establish that level of I think comfort level and legitimacy, I think, with these lenders that you actually can really have a first shot at, for example, like a larger credit facility. So I think that's probably one thing. And to be fair, it's also, I think, just from our perspective, I think it's also just something at the beginning, not having to deal with really the hardcore asset side of the business, or it lets you focus on kind of other things, right? At the beginning of just kind of getting a product in the hands of users, of really kind of getting the flywheel to spin, of kind of figuring out so many other things. And so I do think if you can at the beginning just kind of make it happen and hack your way away without taking the full asset commitment on, I think you should probably take advantage of that. That would be kind of my like high level read of it.
It's not only the lack of access to potentially large debt facilities, it's also lack of focus, to your comment in the beginning. And there's a lot of learnings that you can have from that asset light approach. And then you can take on more and more responsibilities on the user journey or whatever, and then kind of take it to the next step. But the question then is, do you think this is something that will necessarily happen to most marketplaces? Is this kind of the future of marketplaces in your view? Like at some point, as soon as you grow up to a certain level, then you do necessarily vertically integrate. And there's different degrees and flavors to it, but you think that's kind of the natural step, or should be the natural step?
I think it really depends. And again, I think I would really evaluate probably around these dimensions of again, high fragmentation. Is it just a good space to actually aggregate some sort of, for example, supply, right? And I think if you can do that in a highly fragmented market, I think you probably like that's a good shot of actually staying away from the assets. I think the other one is like how important is it to control the consumer experience, and how
to clarify. So then you're thinking if there's enough fragmentation on the supply side, then maybe there's no need to own the assets.
And for example, like I think the two examples are probably right. If you look at kind of restaurants and food delivery, I mean, there's literally thousands of restaurants in kind of larger cities across the US, right? Like I think if you just first principle thinking, you can build. It makes sense to build some sort of powerful aggregated marketplace around that piece. Let's actually look at our market. I mean, there's maybe a handful of rental car companies out there in markets in the US or in core cities. Actually, 60% of the market belongs to kind of like the top 3 or 4. The degree of fragmentation is very, very different, right? And so it's I would say that itself it's a very different dynamics of how powerful of a marketplace you can actually build. Just first principle thinking. So I would say that's around that element. Yeah.
Nick, and the other important thing that you mentioned, which I was thinking while you were telling the story, is how do you balance, the growth of the business with all of these new learnings that you need to take on? Is it like through key hirings, on experts on the matter. In your case, it's very straightforward. It's you need to learn how to do proper fleet management, which you didn't do before. Is it like, how do you upskill your skill set, the other execs skill set? Is it through hires? Is it through upskilling and kind of continuous learning? How do you balance that while also kind of going very fast on your business side?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I do think when we look at our team, I think the team reflects very well kind of also I would say the bits and atoms mindset, right? Like, or the idea behind it. We obviously have amazing product engineering leaders from the kind of Ubers, Amazons, tech companies in place that have built a lot of these world-class systems before. To really build and execute on the technology excellence. On the other side, we have the former VP of Fleet from Avis with us, who basically he belongs probably to the 5 to 10 people that bought the most vehicles in their lives.
Was that founding team, or was that a subsequent hire once you realized you were going that route?
No. That was a subsequent hire.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To really kind of like add essentially our muscle and capability in certain pieces of the business side. And I think it's really about like, yes, in some of these areas, as we go along around operations, around the vehicle side of things. I mean, for example, like we hired our chief operating officer. She was the vice president of operations for Bird. And before that, she was actually scaling fleets at Zipcar and at Enterprise. So, I mean, somebody like that, right? Like, I mean, she is so good in really understanding fleets and managing assets on the ground, really building that operational muscle and super tightly. I do think like having these core critical people on board that have done these things before, and specifically, I think on the asset and fleet side of things, also same with the debt capital side of things. I think that is incredible. That is incredibly important to really build that out, right? And then I think with any sort of company, I think it's I think for some of these roles and hires, I think the question is always there of like, okay, do you want some sort of generic all-rounder versus do you want somebody that has done these things before? And then I think I do think that's in a lot of ways that these are important questions to answer of like, for what type of roles do you want the one versus the other? And I think ultimately a combination of both, kind of really working hand in hand together across the company. I think that's very powerful. But what is the right kind of combination and of that? I don't think that's an easy question to answer. Yeah.
That makes sense. And the last piece that you were mentioning before that I wanted to touch upon is the unit economics piece. And typically asset heavy or capital intensive business or ops heavy businesses have lower margins, and it's typically harder to get to break even at the beginning. How do you, or what levers can you pull to make economics work in this bits and atoms marriage sort of world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, our core three costs of goods sold, how we call them, right? In terms of really again, our core gross margins are fleet costs in terms of interest payments, depreciation, obviously delivery cost for our delivery drivers, as well as like cost for insurance products. And I think in all of those, right, like I think there's a very clear path, and I think we already went a pretty long way so far. But in all of that, there's a very clear path to kind of get to some sort of different levels of margin. I do think what was very important for us from the early days that I think just on that gross margin level, we want to make sure that every transaction is unit economics positive, that is really returning, that really has positive gross margins, right? I do think that level itself, and I think we got to that point very, very early on in our journey, obviously gives you a lot of power and potential to really kind of like execute away from that. And then I think there's just a whole area of other component in terms of our lot operations, in terms of really our parking costs, in terms of other efficiencies of the business, where really the interplay between operations and technology algorithms can just drive a lot of other efficiencies out there, right? And I do think when it's obviously about building the right schedules for our delivery driving partners, when it's about managing utilization in our parking lots, right? Really balancing that with obviously dynamic pricing, with the demand side of things. And so really kind of like also here, right? Like being very intellectually honest of like where does technology actually really move the needle? Where does better operational processes move the needle? I think that's a whole different topic, obviously. But I think just being really clear about that is obviously pretty important.
Yeah, and that's a very good point, because when you talk to a bunch of early stage startups, and it's okay that economics are somewhat underwater at the beginning, and if there's a clear path to profitability on the unit economics side, it needs to be credible. And most of the times, founders say, even they probably believe it, that growth or volume will solve all of the problems. Sometimes it does for certain lines of items, but not necessarily. And so I think, to your point, being intellectually honest, like, what do my unit economics look at scale, and when do I really plow more money into the business before solving economics? Which leads me to my next question, which is, for founders out there, maybe that they launched their businesses already and they have some traction, the coveted product market fit, it's something a bit fuzzy, right? What do you mean by product market fit? Is it, top line growth? Is it profitable product market fit? And when do you really scale it? And when do you really make that decision to say, now I think I'm in a good spot. I'm going to start plowing money into this model and this scale. Do you need to really nail it before you scale it, or can you, where do you draw that line?
Yeah, it's very, very good topic. Yeah, I think the definition of product market fit, there's obviously a lot of different definitions out there. I actually personally, I do like the kind of the scientific one around, okay, if more than 40% of your users tell you that they're very disappointed if you take your product away from them, then that's kind of one signal of product market fit. There's full articles around that, obviously. But I do think there's some interesting kind of.
That's more. I didn't know that one. That's more on the satisfaction aspect.
Yeah. That's basically like how much do your customers actually really? Well, that exactly. That's really on the customer side of things. How much do your customers really basically like want to just grab your product away, right? And like, how much are they desperate about your product? And I do think I think that's a good data point, at least, to kind of like look at and really,
because it rules out all of the companies that are giving, basically selling $1 for 95 cents, right? In which case your metric would pull them out.
Yeah, exactly. But to your point, I do think it's I think that's one of the tricky things around. I think also a lot of companies in the past in Silicon Valley, like tech marketplaces, right, where unit economics were completely upside down. They actually had amazing customer experience. They actually delivered amazing customer experience. But it was just not economically feasible. So I think, to your point, right? Like I think both has to be in place, right? Like you have to have that kind of 10x consumer experience, where again, and I think one measure there is customers would actually be pretty disappointed if they don't have that experience anymore. And I think you can be pretty scientific about measuring that piece. But again, that has to be paired with, I think, some sort of the base level of conviction around your unit economics, right? And I don't think there's one answer, and I think it really depends on the business. I think for us, how I would define it is, or what I would say gave us enough confidence in that topic of product market fit at healthy economics, was, okay, our gross margins are already in a really good state. Obviously, if you go down into net margins, if you look at other like market overhead, if you look at kind of insurance costs out there, I think there was some very obvious elements where we haven't proven it out yet at that back in the days. But I think it was very obvious that if we just kind of keep working on a couple of other things there, and we'll actually get to that point. And for example, one example is insurance, right? It's like, at the beginning, if we have a fleet of, let's say, 50 cars, obviously we overpay on insurance because we're a high risk business. We don't have any data. We don't have any sort of track record in place. But if we then look at the insurance rates from from other, let's say, car rental companies in the space, what they pay for their insurance rates, if we just say, okay, well, obviously we're going to get pretty close to that point. We'll probably actually go get better there because we can actually do our underwriting better. We actually can solve a lot of things with better technology, background checks, all these things. But let's just assume we get to the same kind of level.
Yeah, at least using a benchmark, an existing benchmark. Right. And that's true for CAC as well, for customer acquisition costs, for a bunch of things. If you're expecting much lower or you're projecting that, that's too rosy a projection, in my opinion.
Yeah. So I think to summarize it, right, I think it's really, again, I think the customer magic, the product market fit, the kind of really the certain wedge into your market that you're just offering a product that is really so much better than the rest. I do think that has to be there in order to really drive massive growth, right? Because if you're just 20% better than something existing, it's just, I mean, you can build a business out of it, but I don't think it really satisfied some sort of a venture ambition. But then I think the other thing about the economics, again, I do think your economics don't have to be in the absolute pretty state at the beginning, but I think if the basic gross margins are there, plus you have very good data points that you actually believe in, and you triangulate your business around it, and you say, okay, well, if we actually execute on this and this and this, and over the next 1, 2, 3 years, we'll actually get to a state where then it's a no-brainer. It totally makes sense. And obviously you have to include some buffers that not all of these things will work out in time, and some things will take longer and everything. But I think if you kind of put these things together, then I would say, okay, like let's go for it, right?
Nick, I want to talk a little bit about the future of Kyte. And you're an engineer by background. You've been involved with AI, machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision. So this is your thing. Can you tell us more about the current use of AI at Kyte, and how do you envision that growing over time? And more importantly, kind of how do you get to the end goal? I think I read somewhere, maybe one of your decks or the website, that the end goal is managing the largest autonomous fleet on Earth. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think in the short term, I think there's a couple of areas where I think ML, for example, AI topics, they can actually really drive the needle of the business, I think, in a very in very tangible ways. And that's obviously stuff that the team and engineering is fully focused on, right? And I think examples of that are, for example, about risk management, consumer verification, our pricing, dynamic pricing logic, our delivery driver matching, all of these pieces, right? Like these are kind of prime topics of obviously advanced algorithms, ML, AI topics, optimization, right? Which I think are super exciting as engineers, obviously, to work on. And I do think I'm very proud and bullish always on the kind of team working and chipping away on these really complex problems. Again, also across bits and atoms, obviously. And so again, very tangible business value here. But to your other point, yes. I mean, Kyte's mission is to unlock freedom to go places, right? Like that's our mission. And the way we do that is we bring cars to people's stores for any trip that is longer than a ride tail. And of course, that is what we're executing on that right now. But again, I think with all of that, I think we generally, with actually a very, very good frequency and cadence, I think we kind of go back and say, okay, what are really these other, what are these other beliefs around the future that we have internally that will be important executing on that mission, right? And what are these other dimensions that are really relevant for us, and I think we always bucket it across kind of 3 vectors. One is what are our hypotheses around kind of consumer behavior? What is our hypothesis around kind of cities in the future? And then probably most importantly, what are our hypotheses in terms of transportation in the future? And I think maybe kind of double clicking on kind of two elements here around the transportation topics. I think what we think is most interesting and relevant for us is really looking into the future is probably electrification, and on the one side, and on the other side, autonomous driving, right? And I do think when we think about, okay, what are the right kind of, I don't know, investments or bets and efforts that we have to do now in order to set us up to be really successful, given that the world is moving towards electrification and autonomous vehicles down the road. I do think that's a pretty core piece that, again, it's obviously some sort of it always requires some sort of trade-off, right? Like, okay, well, you want to have, I don't know, the company and the team fully focused on executing on kind of for example, now the next 12 months, a path to full profitability, really, essentially like just scaling the business now that it generates enough cash flow to actually like expand, to go enter new geos, doing all of these things while having kind of these other big mega trends in mind. And I think the way we just try to do that, and I don't think it's I mean, every kind of growth business is kind of has to confront themselves with that decision, and like how much time do you put in this versus this. I do think our approach to it is just whenever we really do something around kind of the longer term pieces here, we just try to be extremely explicit around capital investments, around resourcing, around is it really the right time now to make these bets? I think that's just incredibly important.
How far? Maybe forget about Kyte, right? Like just more on a broad level. How far do you think we are from, that autonomous vision of and you can slice it whatever you want, of self-driving cars or fully autonomous? Like how far do you think are we from kind of a proper operations and maybe ready enough for companies like Kyte to adopt it?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I mean, I do think in some sort of certain bounded designated environments, one could probably say it's really in the order of a few years, right? I do think more broadly speaking, different geos, broader coverage. I would probably put the timeline more into kind of north of 10-year range. But again, it's very rough numbers. I think the reason why I'm actually not super concerned about that, and why I would say I'm not also overthinking on that answer in general, is because the way we position ourselves in Kyte, and I think the way we build our infrastructure is we're ready whenever that piece is ready, right? Like we're basically, the way we always look at it is we're kind of building basically all the other pieces that is actually not kind of core autonomy, right? While others are focusing on the perception layers, the lidars, just really building a sensor stack around that, we're focusing on the infrastructure and the consumer experience and access, and we have to build that anyway, right? And so, and let's just basically build a profitable, good business around these pieces. And once autonomy is ready, we'll partner with the right partners. We'll plug it in. There is obviously the element of teleoperated driving, means basically a remote operated or remote driver somewhere else can just kind of
because that's a
remotely
sequence,
control.
Right? Like today's version, teleoperation, and then fully autonomous.
Correct. I would say most people agree that teleoperation will kind of be a little bit of a kind of bridging point, or at least will help kind of autonomy to establish itself in some sort of period. And so I think long story short, I think independent of when full autonomy will be ready in certain geos in the world, I think we'll have the infrastructure in place to kind of like plug that in. Yeah.
Understood. And so now let's talk about the other mega trend that you mentioned, which is electrification. And do you think that's coming sooner? I mean, it's already here, obviously, in some capacity. But do you think this will become more mainstream sooner than we'll get, autonomous vehicles, for instance? Do you think this is sooner than the other mega trend?
I mean, I think specifically in the last 12 months, I think it's really actually pretty incredible to see how much how much finally electrification and electric vehicles are kind of like picking up in terms of share of overall new vehicle purchases, of kind of consumer adoption, right? And I definitely think that's something that is much more that is happening now, that we have to take very seriously, and that is super exciting. I mean, we do have a significant share of electric vehicles now in the fleet. We're expanding that share next year. We'll have certain goals for both next year as well as 2024 in terms of like really share of electric vehicles out there for us. So I think it's super exciting, and it's I mean, for us, there's obviously a pretty significant opportunity out there, right? In terms of really building the infrastructure for it, like the charging infrastructure in our hubs. In terms of really building the right product for the consumer, in terms of really being educated around kind of like charging cycles, range anxiety, addressing these things. So yeah.
Do you think this is the fact that you guys have X percentage of your fleet from electric vehicles, and Hertz and AVs, they all have some sort of agreements, commercial agreements with either Tesla or other kind of manufacturers? Do you think that's more of a PR move, or is it really a demand pool from customers that wanted these solutions? How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think some of the announcement, I think I would definitely put them very much on the kind of PR corner, into the PR bucket probably. But I do think the consumers are, in general, they're ready for it, right? And I think we're not dogmatic around it, that we say, okay, I don't know, next year we'll be at 90% EV coverage in our fleet or penetration. But I think there is a certain subset of customers which are excited about it. So I think it's real. Yeah.
One of the interesting things about car rentals is that I think there's a study saying that one of the reasons why people are not buying electric vehicles, forget about pricing or autonomy or efficiency, whatever, it's they haven't even tried it. They have never tried an electric vehicle before. So rental company actually, serves that purpose of actually trying an electric vehicle for a couple of days. And so it could be a door into mainstream adoption.
100%. Yeah. No, it's great. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Nick, let's the other thing I wanted to talk about, and we've been on this macro topic for the last couple of minutes. So the other kind of big thing going on in tech is the overall layoffs in big tech. And specifically, I wanted to get your take on that, but more from looking at it from a lens of, if you think there's a shift in culture that we're starting to experience in these tech companies. And what I mean by that, or maybe the main characterization that I can think of, is what Elon Musk is doing at Twitter, right? Doing layoffs, such as many other companies as well, but kind of doubling down on this winning, more kind of hustle or hardcore culture, I think he called it. What do you think of that? And what do you think? Do you think we're seeing the pendulum swing back from kind of the buffet and free food sort of things that most big tech firms were known for the past 10 years, back to the garage days? And there's a very good post by Mike Solana from Founders Fund talking about the garage days coming back. Like, what's your thought around this?
It's a really, really interesting discussion, obviously, going on there, and definitely kind of lots of things to unpack here. I do think the primary discussion around Elon and Twitter and a lot of these other things, right, is really around like work ethics, work culture, work intensity, right, and kind of how much do we want to embrace and celebrate a culture of working really, really hard, or how much do we actually want to incentivize that? It's funny, like we actually it's funny that you said garage days. We actually literally like started the company in a garage. So I know it sounds always cliche, but my two co-founders and I were actually living in a garage for a couple of months when we started the company. In general, I would say I would almost say it's a little bit of a confirmation for me and for us as a company, that I would claim we're already much more on that side of our culture, what we expect from our people. And I think now kind of Elon kind of triggering these discussions with Twitter. I see it as more of like, okay, we're actually right. And I mean, I would personally hope he's proving other people right, that's the way to build, and that's the way to really run a company. Again, I think I think for us in general, I think we definitely put a lot of effort in making sure that the work bar actually is incredible high, or like was incredible high over the last couple of years already. And I think the other piece why I would actually say I appreciate kind of like Elon's move with actually being explicit around the things now in that email around like, okay, this is going to be hardcore. This is going to be another level of intensity. Is I think it creates a lot of clarity and alignment in a company, right? And so just by actually like calling it out of like, hey, this is now what we expect in that new version of the company.
If you want to leave, just leave, and there's severance for you. And so not that different from what different circumstances, but what Brian Amsher did at Coinbase when he said like, this is our mission. We're not going to talk about politics, not going to talk about religion. If you want to leave, leave. And there were like 80 people that left. So
exactly. And I think that's an amazing kind of that's amazing fair tool of alignment, or and brings and makes it very clear that like, okay, and this is a very explicit definition of culture going forward, right? And to be fair, I mean, we had a few conversations with us internally. I think we were already doing a pretty decent job in being explicit about these things, but yeah, we'll probably also take another shot of just kind of like restating again of like, okay, this is really what we stand for. This is what we expect. This is what you can expect from us, and that's kind of the relationship that I think is fair, right? Between a company and everybody joining them and all the team members. So I think I personally think it's I feel happy that kind of Elon is maybe kind of popularizing that kind of that element again a little bit, and I think it definitely resonates with us. Yeah. No, I think I mean I just want to be clear, right? Like I think this, because when people talk about the garage days or so again, I do think that the hustle and work culture and the intense work culture of the hustle days, I think that's something that I think is very valuable if you kind of keep that. I do think there's this other element of garage days of like the kind of full pirate spirit on kind of breaking rules and crossing lines and just kind of always kind of being a little bit too hacky and scrappy. I do think that's something, and I do think probably like I don't think Elon and Twitter would do that either. I think that's something where I think you have to invest in some of the right pieces to grow up and mature as a company, right? And so I don't think so. I think what I'm saying is I think you can have a culture of intensity and working incredibly hard and hustling at a matured company without just being a bunch of scrappy pirates that are breaking rules and bending things all the time. So I think I really would see it as like two very different conversations actually. And I think again, you can still keep this hustle culture while actually maturing and growing up in different elements of the company, which I think is required in a lot of ways, right?
For sure. And going back to our initial piece of the conversation, with Travis at Uber, just taking the good things and there's a post 2017 from Reid Hoffman about being pirates and being part of the Navy. And the necessary step is, yes, you can start as pirate, but then eventually you have to kind of graduate and become a Navy admiral or something like that. And a bunch of discussions around the now infamous, move fast and break things. There's a lot of things that are very good about that. And to your point, being scrappy, winning mentality, move fast, iterate. But then there's a lot of things that you have to stop doing after you have reached a certain scale, and you cannot be playing around and breaking things past a certain point. And so I think the right sweet spot is having that winning mentality while also being aware of, and we can talk about FTX as well, and being aware of, I think that post that I mentioned talks about the ethical pirate or the unethical pirate. And so, yeah, again, could discuss this for hours, but I think it's a very interesting conversation in total. I do think we're seeing the pendulum swinging back to the scrappy days of entrepreneurship. And hopefully we'll see a bunch of new companies emerge in this time. They're tough times, but there's a lot of tough founders as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, again, back to your point around Uber and Travis, right? I definitely think Uber kind of was a little bit too late in growing up and maturing in some of these core dimensions, and they kind of missed the right point to actually put a little bit more structure, processes in place in the right elements of the business. And so I think, again, I really see it as like two very different dimensions. On the one side, kind of the work ethics and what to expect versus like the level of scrappiness versus maturity. I think these are two vectors.
Totally. Okay, Nick, can't thank you enough for the time. This was an awesome conversation. Just let's wrap it up with closing remarks on your end. Where can people find more about you, about Kyte? You guys are live in a couple of cities. Where is that? Just invite people to sign up and try the magical product that you guys have.
Exactly. No, absolutely. We're in 14 markets in the US. Very much all West Coast, all East Coast. Denver and Chicago are like our central markets. Obviously, yeah. Kyte.com, KYTE.com. Both mobile app, both website. I think as a consumer, that's obviously, it will be the best experience of getting a car for a day or longer. There's no doubt around that. And I think on the other side, right, like, again, we're obviously well capitalized now after our Series B. We're definitely hiring for a bunch of different roles across engineering, product, operations, markets, finance, the supply side, growth. Obviously, yeah, very complex problems to solve, massive market. I think, again, we talked about the kind of culture here. I think that's whoever that resonates with and working with a high caliber team. I think that's yeah, we obviously want to talk to those people. Yeah.
We'll put the link to some of these things, including the career page for people that are interested to kind of directly apply.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah.
All right, Nick. Cool. Really appreciate it.